Johannesburg summit of the Forum of China-Africa Cooperation was not only historic because it was the first FOCAC summit to take place in the African continent. The Johannesburg summit has in essence propelled this partnership to that of a comprehensive strategic and cooperative partnership. In that way, we have assured that we are better able to address the pressing needs of our peoples.
Last week's Forum on China-Africa Cooperation truly was an historic event, and South Africa cemented its own place in history by hosting the first summit on African soil. By co-chairing the event, South African President Jacob Zuma took on the great responsibility of representing Africa and pushing the agenda of not only his own country's needs, but those of the entire continent. Tonight, we bring you an exclusive conversation with Jacob Zuma. I'm Penina Karibe. Welcome to Talk Africa. Now, Jacob Zuma has been at the helm of South Africa since 2008, which is also the same year that China overtook Germany as South Africa's biggest trading partner. Since then, cooperation between the two countries has grown exponentially, with Chinese investment reaching a record $60 billion in 2014. After the 2015 FOCAC summit concluded, Beatrice Marshall sat down with the president to reflect on FOCAC's effectiveness as well as the growing relationship between South Africa and China. Your Excellency, thank you for your time. Now, you co-hosted the Forum for China and Africa Cooperation here in South Africa. First, how significant has this been for South Africa, for you, and for Africa?
Well, it has been very important, very significant. Firstly, the fact that we reached an agreement with China that the FOCAC should be held in South Africa and be co-chaired by President Xi Jinping and the President of South Africa. For us to have that agreement, I think it was very important because the preparations took a different kind of shape and momentum. The fact that, therefore, that has happened for the first time in Africa was an important thing. It was a historic. And the response of the colleagues in the continent also indicated that this decision was absolutely correct. And I think it has been, to some degree, an innovation of really putting more value in these relations between China and Africa. So it has been important for the country in the first instance, was to have this kind of interaction in South Africa. It makes South Africans be part of these processes and understand what is happening between the countries, particularly because there was a state visit first, which in itself brought an attention between China and South Africa with regard of the issues that were discussed between the two. But once it came to the level of the summit, I think it created something else. I think almost everybody felt this summit was different from many other summits. And not just as in the manner in which it was organized, but also the content of the discussion that took place, particularly as President Xi Jinping pitched up the level by making such breathtaking announcements about what is it that he was pledging to partner with Africa. Right. It was absolutely important. It left everybody very happy, unprecedented kind of thing. There is no country that has done so in the past, and China really demonstrated it is the real friend of Africa.
What was Africa's expectation of the forum, and were those expectations met?
Yes, the summit has achieved its goal. We felt that this summit must do better than other summits. It was a summit outside of China for the first time that it was in Africa. And necessarily, if you take the growing relations between China and Africa, it was important that it should succeed. We prepared for it. I think both sides prepared for it, particularly China. Now, with the announcements made by President Xi Jinping, that I think pitched the success very high. Everybody is very happy with the success. There are very tangible things that were mentioned, that were being talked about. And Africa was very happy with that. We are already beginning to think, how are we going to position ourselves immediately after to think about the details of how this is going to be implemented between the two. So yes, the success was more than what we expected.
In the sense of the win-win cooperation that the forum talked about, where is the win-win for Africa? Where do you see the win-win for China?
Well, firstly, China is coming in. China is coming to do business in Africa, but it's not just doing business only. We have, for an example, things, potentials that we can utilize because there are blockages somehow. If you take, for an example, the issue of infrastructure, because of the colonial arrangement and how this was structured, much as we are in one continent, not divided by any sea or river, we have not been in connection. There has been no inter-trade because of the lack of the infrastructure. We need infrastructure very much. We have identified this long time ago. We raised this with China from the BRICS outreach. We also raised it when we were in FOCAC in China. And therefore China has responded to that because unlocking the connection between the countries here, that opens up the flow of the economy. China, which is part of our partner, will benefit out of it. Because even the goods that must move will be faster in a modern kind of infrastructure. So we would have gained developing, opening up, growing our economy. But China is our partner too, will indeed benefit out of that because it will be able to do business in a country that has favorable kind of conditions. If you take energy, that's another kind of issue. Energy is one of the blockages that is not making our economies to grow. Now, if we grow energy together with China, China gains as well. We also gain. And therefore, I believe that even the movement of the goods to China and backwards will be now having a very open kind of a situation. So we both gain. But also, the very fact that, as we said, this is based on trust, on benefiting both of us, it's absolutely important that this would go. One of the things that China has committed itself is already doing is helping to skill our people so that we'll have a skilled kind of workforce in the continent. That is an important foundation that is also agreed with China. So all of us will be able to gain.
Now some people are asking, what exactly is China doing in Africa? What's your take on that?
Western countries have come to Africa for centuries to rob Africa of its resources. They should be admitting what they've done. Some are rich because of the resources they took from Africa. They never thought of helping Africa to develop. They subjugated Africa. They took the political power, economic power, and then made us, therefore, socially, to have no power at all. We had to fight to liberate ourselves. They were never here to help. They were here to rob. After decolonization, they continued to do so. They could no longer use political power. They influenced it indirectly, but they held on to the economic levers of these countries. They were dominating, they were benefiting, they were doing nothing to help us. They created banks that were instruments of subjugating us. They would say, for an example, to the IMF, when the IMF will say, my country's in trouble, can you help? It will put conditions that will put you in a worse situation than before. So it was not helping. What China is doing, China is coming and saying, here we are. We know where you come from. We are here to work with you. For the first time, when China came here, highways began to emerge in the continent of Africa that were never there when they were here all the time. China is working with us. FOCAC is one example that China as a country is ready to sit down and discuss how do we help, how do we relate to one another. And perhaps many other FOCAC summits that took place before, people were not very clear. This FOCAC that has taken place here in South Africa has made matters to be more clearer than any other time. The kind of pledges that China has made and the kind of relations that it has with different countries. China is not here to rob or to colonize. It's here to help Africa develop. President Xi Jinping said it himself. We need to develop together. We are together making progress. These are the issues. For an example, the issue of infrastructure, energy, many others. Nobody took care of these matters. Even if you said to them, we need a road, they never came. If you talk to China, China says, let us come. Let us make the roads. Now, it is even voting money so that we can quicken the decision that has been taken by the AU to create the infrastructure continental. China says that we have taken that decision. Here are the resources for that. Energy, we are together. They are just feeling they are being replaced because they were here doing nothing for the people here, doing something for themselves. China is coming to help. As it helped us in the struggle to liberate ourselves from them, it is now helping us to develop so that we can be economically independent, stand on our own, take our own decisions. We know that argument is a flawed argument.
The 10-point plan that President Xi Jinping announced for the next 3 years, from industrialization to infrastructure to health to people-to-people exchanges, what do you think are Africa's priorities?
We're very happy that there were very specific announcements made by President Xi. You'll recall that in the interactions that we have heard with China, starting from the last meeting, before that, when President Xi met the African leaders in the BRICS summit that was here in South Africa, there was a lot of discussions as to what were the priority issues in terms of the continent. The announcement of the 10-point plan gave sufficient evidence to us that China listened to what Africa was saying, and therefore it did not come with its own thought-out ideas. It actually met the expectations of the African leaders. So to us, this was absolutely important. It also deals with issues in Africa that once we deal with them, the development in Africa will be very visible. The situation will change. Africa's priority is industrialization. That is a decision taken already. Firstly, as a country, we've taken that decision of industrializing. As a region, the SADC, we've taken that decision. The AU has taken that decision, industrialization. Now, if China participates in that process of industrialization of South Africa, that in itself helps Africa to go up, but it helps China to have a continent that they are able to interact on very serious matters of industry. It's absolutely crucial to us that we develop that one. But also, it's important that many of the elements that were counted, like agriculture, for an example, it's going to open up a lot of opportunities for us to export to China the agricultural products that China needs as well. There will be many others that will be done. The issue of health is one of the critical points in the continent. Health and education to us, these are part of the priorities. That China is participating already. Some African children are studying in China in big numbers. That to us is an important in terms of education, of skilling our people. Absolutely crucial that the IT issue, for an example, is also taken up, because today, if we are to do business, we have got to have IT so that your business can move as swiftly as possible, like it is happening globally. So these are very critical priorities that China is talking to in terms of the pledges that it made.
We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll hear more of the South African president's hopes for both his own country and the rest of the continent. Stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. We continue our conversation with Jacob Zuma. Now, as British Marshal asked the South African president about the country's growing ties with China, as well as his views on other matters on the African continent.
There's great potential to be tapped between China and South Africa. How will the two countries tap into this potential?
Well, I think what has happened already, it's a direct focus on what should come out of this relationship. These that have been discussed and agreed upon, they are, for now, enough for us to have something to work on in the next period. We are already thinking, as the Africans, we've begun to think we'll conclude this thought properly next month in the summit of AU, the issue of what is it that we need to do, because we must also think hard as to how do we unpack these pledges that China has made. How do we make them, or make them to be effective kind of activities leading up to the next year? So we are very happy. We've got the homework to do, and we know exactly what we need to do. We are going to be adding impetus to our own kind of plans that are there, because the infrastructure plans are there. So we've started some of them, but the resources would always be a challenge. I think China has helped us to address that issue.
Bilateral trade between China and South Africa has grown 40 times since 1998. How do you rate the trade ties between China and South Africa today?
Well, I think, as you know, we started the relations at a particular level. I think that is an indication that these are two mutual friends who understand this relationship. The fact that it is growing, it indicates that we are going very far with China. I think there's a lot that we are going to do with China. As you know, we relate to China as South Africa at a bilateral level. We also relate to China at a Africa-China level. We also relate to China in BRICS. So there are many avenues that allow us to do more than what we've done so far. And I think both sides are ready to deepen or broaden the kind of relationship. So I'm very happy. I'm looking forward of a kind of a relationship that is going to be much higher than what it is, because we still have a long way to go, but I think we have an understanding. We have an understanding between the two that we are partnering and we are helping one another.
What is South Africa doing to attract more Chinese investment?
You'll of course recall that before, just a day or so before the summit, President Xi Jinping paid a state visit where we had bilateral discussions, which also emerged with very important conclusions. So between the two countries, there is a lot that we are doing together. Bear in mind that we were the first as a country bilaterally to have a comprehensive agreement with China, which we are now implementing. And there are processes that are going on a number of areas that were then agreed at the time. So from our point of view as well, we are very happy with the relations that we are having. And I think the state visit did cement and strengthen those kind of agreements that we have. So at a bilateral level, we are very happy too.
One of the other issues that has been a challenge for Africa, though, has been in the area of peace and security. And China did announce at the forum a further $60 million towards the African Union's peace and security initiatives. What will this mean for Africa?
For Africa, it means a lot. Because, as you know, there are still some pockets in Africa where there are tensions and some violence. And Africa has been thinking, how do we handle this? We have taken a decision to establish, for example, the standby force, the brigade, African Union Standby Force Brigade. But that was taking too long because we're discussing it here and there. We then thought we needed something in the interim, which is our immediate reaction force that would be moving with countries that volunteered to do so. Now, once these matters have been raised with China as well, what China has done, in addition to what it has done here, when it was at the United Nations, it made a global announcement that is going to give 2 chunks of pledges to Africa to assist develop these 2 groupings in terms of military that will enhance the capacity of Africa to be able to deal with its own kind of problems. What it has said, it is actually adding to what it has already pledged. To us, China understands our needs better because it says we need to help you, Africa, to be able to deal with what is causing a delay in terms of the development in the continent. Because as you know, for example, the north of Africa, there are more problems there than before. That's where the lot of refugees come from who are crossing because of insecurity, etc. The situation in Mali, the situation in Nigeria, a number of issues. We need a capacity to do so. So our friends, the Chinese, are saying, we are ready. Already hear what we pledge as part of what needs to be done. We are very happy. In other words, China's forward-coming is actually responding to us to what are burning issues in the continent. So China is very concerned with the security. And again, I must always remember this because to me it was very important that China celebrating 70 years of defeat of fascism, it made a very important point that China's military strength is not to start wars, but it's to stop wars in the world, also to protect the poor. So the Chinese strength globally is different from others who are strengthening themselves in order to fight others. China is there for peace, to stop war and bring peace and stability in the world. It is very good to have such a friend.
What do you think Africa's approach should be, though, Your Excellency? Because you have previously mentioned that the situation in Libya, for instance, is as a result of foreign intervention. What do you think Africa's approach towards conflict, Africa's approach towards the terrorism challenge should be?
Africa should stand together, and we are discussing that already. How do we deal with this issue? For an example, we are discussing that in the coming SADC, the issue of security must dominate the discussion, particularly because we can now not just talk, not knowing where the resources will come from. We now know that we have a friend in China who could, if we work out our plans, they could join in to help us. So the issue of Libya is a big issue that we are discussing. We want to work for Libya that is going to be united. And there are processes that have already started. We want to increase the capacity of the standby force so that we are able to send it wherever. In fact, the coming AU, this issue will dominate the debate of security and stability in the continent of Africa. We are now, for an example, we have had the exercise done by the standby force here in South Africa, of all the forces put together to make this standby force brigade. So it's a matter that is there already. Therefore, the support by China is in fact putting us, giving us value in what we are already doing. So we now know the capacity is going to be there.
Looking back at 2015, for Africa, has it been a good or a bad year? And what is going to be your focus for 2016? Well,
it has been a difficult year. Like all years have their own difficulties. But I think we've also made some progress. What has impacted to Africa has been the global economic difficulties. But even if that was the case, Africa has been growing. It's been one of the regions that has been economically growing, and we are going to work hard. The very discussions that we are having with China are going to help us even to grow our numbers in terms of how the economy is growing. Certainly, the year coming is looking very bright with all of these that has been declared, that we are working on, our plans, etc. It will be better, far better than the year that we have passed. And Africa is getting more united because we now have a number of economic things that we are doing together, because that is always a glue that brings people together. So we are very hopeful that in the next year we are going to be making good progress.
And your message for China?
We are saying to China, thank you very much for China's understanding of Africa's difficulties and challenges, as it has always done. We are thankful that the Chinese leadership and the people of China are prepared to be with us, to pull with us under these kind of circumstances. China's announcements, this summit, demonstrated clearly for all to know that China is here as a friend, to come and partner with a friend. Thank you very much to China for what you have done.
And thank you, Your Excellency, for your time.
Thank you for tuning in to Talk Africa. We'll be back next week with more insights from leaders on the African continent. I'm Penina Karibe. Goodbye for now.